Hello, and welcome to the Sci-Fi Christian Book Reviews, brought to you by the Sci-Fi Christian.com. I'm Ben DeBono, here to talk to you today about the second novel in Peter Straub's Blue Rose trilogy, Mystery. This is the sequel to Coco, which I reviewed a couple weeks ago, maybe even not that long ago. Got through this one pretty quick, listening to it on audiobook. And if you didn't watch that review, I gave Coco 5 stars. It was a reread for me. I've read all of these Peter Straub books before, but really don't remember them at all. I read them back when I was a teenager, so these are pretty, I will catch bits and pieces as I listen to these that come back and will kind of spark some bit of some remembrance in me. But for the most part, these are almost like new reads for me. But I've been listening to them on audiobook. So I gave Coco 5 stars, which was surprising for me because I can remember liking but not loving that one the first time I read it. And when we come to the second book, Mystery, my memory was loving it a lot. I think I would have rated this one a 5-star book. And I can understand why that was my reaction the first time around, because it's a very, very good book. Before I get into kind of what I thought of it this time, I want to talk a bit about in what sense this is a sequel to Coco, and in what sense these books in the Blue Rose trilogy are connected. Plot-wise, there's very little in Mystery that is set up by Coco, okay? In fact, you could read this book without even knowing Coco exists, or let alone having read it, and you could follow the plot fine, and everything would be fine. You wouldn't miss anything plot-wise if you read this book standalone. Similarly, you could stop right here and not go on to the third entry in the trilogy, The Throat, and you would also be fine. You'd feel like you had a complete story. So there's nothing in here plot-wise that depends on the other 2 books, either to set up or fulfill, and even though this is the middle volume in the trilogy. So in that sense, these books in the trilogy are fairly loosely connected. The Throat, which I've now started listening to, I can tell you, does tie Coco and Mystery together a bit more. But we'll get to that when I finish that book and do the review on that one. But at least for these first 2, they could be read completely independently of each other. One doesn't require the other. You could read them in either order and be just fine plot-wise. Not thematically, though, okay? And this is what is so brilliant about this trilogy, is if you watch my Coco review, one of the things I talked about a lot is how it's an absolute masterpiece from a thematic perspective. And so Peter Straub sets up this whole theme of identity and duality that exists in Coco, where nearly every single character in that novel is 2 or more people. And you can watch the review of that one for more of an explanation of what I mean there. But there's a strong sense of identity, strong sense of duality that's in that book, and it's absolutely brilliant thematically, completely incredible, just out of this world good. That theme is the foundation for everything that's going on thematically in Mystery. So from a thematic perspective, you have to read Coco first, or you're going to miss so much of the depth of what Straub is getting at. Let me see if I can explain. So what do I mean by when I say that it's that sense of dual identity or even triple identity or more is the foundation for what's going on thematically in Mystery. So just as in Coco, you have a character who appears one way and is really another way, or is leading 2 different lives, or however it might be in that book. In Mystery is actually the double of Coco. And here's what I mean by that. In Coco, we are introduced, and I won't get into any spoilers here, but one of the locations that winds up figuring very prominently into the book is the town of Mill Haven, Wisconsin, okay? And we're introduced to several key features of Mill Haven. such as we learned that there's 2 hotels, the St. Alwyn's, I think it is, and the Forsheims. I might be getting the names slightly wrong, but there's these 2 hotels, and, Straub kind of lays out all of these different geographical features that seem like they're just window dressing in Coco. Okay, so then we get to mystery, and we are introduced to the town of Milwaukee, which is not in Wisconsin, despite it what word am I trying to say? Etymologically, I don't know. Word-wise, anyway, is very close to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It's actually set on a Caribbean island. So Milwaukee, this town on the Caribbean island, but its geography is identical, or at least nearly identical. Maybe if you went through with a fine-tooth comb in these 2 books, you could find a couple discrepancies, but nearly identical to Millhaven, the town in Coco. The 2 hotels that are in town are exactly the same. So you have this fascinating duality that exists there as well. Tim Underhill, who is a character and turns out to be one of the main characters in Coco and really the main character of the trilogy, is only mentioned in mystery. He's never actually shows up on screen or on the page, as the case may be. But his character is kind of a dual version of the Tim Underhill in Coco, even though he's only referred to as the author of The Divided Man, which he is in Coco as well, but the timeline is off. So in Coco, he goes to Vietnam and then writes The Divided Man after Vietnam is over and after he's out of his military service. Here, this book is set in the 60s, and The Divided Man is already written, and it's an older book. So we have this sort of duality there as well. Okay, so we have this foundation of duality that shows up a few places to connect the 2 books. But what this book does then is it again returns to the theme of identity, but instead of exploring it in the sense of duality, it explores it in different ways. It's a strong coming-of-age novel where our protagonist, Tom Passmore, is 17. I suppose I should explain the plot a little bit, even though to me the plot is almost incidental to the novel because it's so strong thematically, but I get not everybody thinks about books that way. So the plot is basically we have Tom Passmore who is in this brutal accident that nearly kills him at the beginning of the novel. Flash forward 7 years, and now he's kind of become this amateur detective who is investigating both a current crime that's linked to a past crime, and this starts to unravel various things in the town, and that's really all you want to know going into this. So anyway, we have Tom Passmore, who is in this kind of coming-of-age story, which has a strong sense of identity. There's also, but maybe the biggest theme in terms of identity that's expressed in this novel, and it's subtle, you really have to dig for it, is this sense of, to put it in theological terms, which I don't think Peter Straub would, but since this is a Sci-Fi Christian, I'll run with it because it fits. Predestination versus free will shows up in this book a lot. For example, there's one character who we are introduced to very early on, and then becomes more important later on in the book, called Lamont von Hylands. And when Tom first sees Lamont, he's described and he notices that he dresses very peculiarly and he carries himself in a very peculiar way. And Tom at first is thrown aback by that. That's really weird. And then he realizes that, I forgot exactly how Straub puts it, but it's something to the effect of, well, of course he's that way because that's the only way he could possibly be. That is who he is. That is who he must be. And the whole thing with Tom's accident at the very beginning of the novel, where he's almost killed in this car crash, or not so much a crash because he's not in a car, but he's hit by a car and he almost dies. And that's not a spoiler, that's on the back of the book. If you read the plot description, it happens within the first couple chapters. Okay, so not a spoiler, but it happens to him. And so there's a sense that that moment contributes to him becoming the only person he could possibly be. And so there's a sense of destiny or predestination, to use the theological category, that who you will be, who you are meant to be. that the things that happen to you, like an accident, or even the way that you dress, or all the different events in your life that lead you up to who you are, make you the only possible person you can be. Okay. But then there's other characters, like Tom's father, Victor Passmore, who's a very bitter individual. And as the novel goes on, we learn that a big part of why he's bitter, and I won't get into the specifics or whatever, but a big part of why he's bitter is because his life isn't the way that he thought it should be. Life hasn't gone the way he thought it would for him. And there's almost this sense, and Straub doesn't really spell this out, but it's out there, that with characters like Tom and Lamont von Heilitz, they are who they were meant to be. But with a character like Victor, he at some level has refused who he was meant to be and is now a bitter person because of it. So that's really fascinating to me. This whole sense of identity in terms of destiny or predestination versus free will versus the refused destiny versus settling for security over the risk that is involved with becoming who you're meant to be. So fascinating stuff, and really takes the novel beyond the typical coming of age stuff. Not that there's anything wrong with coming of age novels. I mean, I think they have their place and that they can be really well done. But the whole sense, the deeper themes, and especially building on what was in Coco, takes this from being just your average coming-of-age novel to being something much more. And then we do have a continuation of that sense of duality, as I mentioned, not just as the foundation to link the two books, but even within this novel as a whole, where several characters will be one thing at one stage of the novel, and then they will become something else. They will have to live one life with one set of people and one life with another set of people. The town of Milwaukee in the Caribbean island is linked to this town of Eagle Lake that we learn about, that's in Wisconsin, where a lot of the residents from Milwaukee go to vacation. So there is this sense of duality as well. So it's a great example of A, building on the foundation of Coco, B, adding themes to that foundation, and then C, continuing on with the themes that he began in the first book. So this is really an excellent novel. Now, I mentioned at the beginning that I understood why I was more thrilled with this one than I was with Coco when I originally read this. And that's because this plot is much more accessible than Coco's. It's faster paced. I almost said better paced, but I don't think that's true. I think Coco is excellently paced. I just think it's slow. And some people confuse those two. And I don't think that's correct. A slow book can have an excellent pace and still be slow. Coco being a prime example of that. This is a fast-paced book. It's the story moves along at a good clip. It's very accessible. Where in Coco, I think you could read the book just for the plot, but I think you're going to come away somewhat dissatisfied, as I did on my initial reading, and was much more satisfied reading this one thematically. In this book, I think that you could take just the plot, ignore the themes, and come away quite happy, which is what I suspect happened to me the first time. And that's really my one criticism of the book, okay? On one level, that's good. You know, I think it's good that it's accessible. On another level, though, I think part of what made Coco work so well is that you had to work for it. You had to work for the themes. It didn't let you off the hook with what Straub was trying to say. And I feel like the accessibility of this novel could almost let people off the hook. You know, you could read it as a fun murder, mystery, crime fiction thing and just ignore everything else he's trying to say in the novel. And I don't know if that's a good thing. It works in some cases. I mean, there are novels that work on different levels. You know, Lord of the Rings, my favorite book of all time, okay? You can read that on so many levels and it works brilliantly. But this one, and maybe it's because it's part of the Blue Rose trilogy and because it follows Coco, which is so different in that regard, I feel like that was a bit of a mistake. Not a major one. I mean, we're nitpicking here, okay? I'm nitpicking big time because this is a great book. But if there is a flaw in it. It's that this is a series that shouldn't let you off the hook for what Straub is trying to say. And the second book in the trilogy, unfortunately, does exactly that. Or, well, let me correct myself. It has the potential to do that. I don't think it does do that. For somebody like me who was reading it with those themes in mind, you're not let off the hook, okay? You can enjoy it on both levels simultaneously. But you could get away from what Straub is trying to say pretty quickly. And I don't think that's a good thing. But besides that, fantastic novel. Great read. You won't be disappointed. Do start with Coco for the themes. I would strongly recommend that, even though you don't have to plot-wise. I think it's much more satisfying that way. But if you don't, and you just want to read a standalone Peter Straub novel, this is a good one too. So I'm going to give it 4.75, just as close to 5 as we can, but I'm going to take away just a little bit because of that one problem I mentioned. But still, that's pretty nitpicky. I'd be happy rating this a 5 if you forced me to round up or whatever. But 4.75, just a little bit below Coco, but still a great book in its own right. So, Mystery by Peter Straub, Book 2 in the Blue Rose Trilogy, highly recommended. I don't think you can go wrong with this series, and so far I can tell you, even though I'm not super far into it, but I'm really enjoying The Throat as well, and I think it's going to be a great conclusion to this trilogy. But I'll be back with that whenever I finish it. But for now, I'm Ben DiBono, and this is the Sci-Fi Christian Book Reviews.